Hello, and welcome to the third video on airway mapping made easy, the video tutorial series where I demystify the art of converting a CT thorax into a hand-drawn 2D map of the airways for bronchoscopy. I'm Pip, an interventional pulmonologist from Woodlands Health, Singapore, and in today's video, I will be taking you through an airway map of the middle lobe. Please feel free to revisit the first video on my YouTube channel to review the concepts of airway mapping, and do like, share and subscribe to my channel for more upcoming video tutorials. Today's case is a 68-year-old female non-smoker who was found to have a persistent right middle zone rounded opacity on chest X-ray, which was confirmed on CT imaging. I will play through the CT images now for you to identify the location of the lung mass, before we proceed to going through the 5 steps of airway mapping. To recap, this is our framework on the 5 steps to airway mapping. We will go through this together, step by step. The first step is to locate the lung segment in which the lesion is located. Take a moment to rewind the video if you need to review the CT scan and lock in your answer. Yes, it is in the middle lobe. We can then go on to the second step, which is to find the appropriate CT reconstruction. Recall from the first video, the first concept is that all airways travel in one of 3 general directions: in the cranial caudal direction, anterior-posterior, or medial-lateral directions. This can be in the axial plane, as illustrated by the red tube which travels in a cranial caudal direction, the coronal plane, illustrated by the yellow tube where the airway travels in an anterior-posterior direction, or the sagittal plane where the airway travels in a medial to lateral direction. The third key concept is that tubes, when viewed end-on, appear as circles. What we want to do is to draw our map as a series of circles by finding the CT view in which the tubes will appear as such. I have enlisted the help of my daughter's teddy bear and a straw to help demonstrate this in 3D to allow you to visualize the concept. If the airway travels in a cranial to caudal direction, as shown by the straw, if we were to section it this way, and to use the axial view, you will then view it as a circle. If the airway travels in a medial to lateral direction, using the sagittal view will allow you to see it as a circle. And finally, if the airway travels in an anterior to posterior direction, using the coronal view will help you to see it as a circle. We can thus see that the branches of the middle lobe appear as tubes which travel in a posterior to anterior direction. Hence, by sectioning it perpendicularly, we should use the coronal CT to visualize the tubes as circles. Now that we have located the mass in the middle lobe and decided to use the coronal CT, we then need to proceed to steps 3 and 4, which is to orientate the CT image through flipping and/or rotation to align with the bronchoscopic view, and to match the direction of our CT scrolling to the expected movement of the bronchoscope. It is important to be able to correctly identify the middle lobe segment on the coronal CT, and we can do so with the help of the axial CT. The image on the left shows the original axial CT, and the image on the right is the coronal CT. We start by scrolling down the axial CT to find the bronchus intermedius and the middle lobe. As we scroll down, we can see the middle lobe starting to appear right here. When we have found the middle lobe as indicated by this laser, we can then start scrolling down the coronal CT until we find the point where the horizontal blue line intersects with the middle lobe airway. You can see that the middle lobe appears as a circle in the coronal image. We can now proceed to use the coronal CT and orientate it to the bronchoscopic image. It is crucial to understand the movements made by the bronchoscope, as these are the same movements which we will need to make to orientate the CT scan. During bronchoscopy into the middle lobe, we are moving in a cranial to caudal direction, where we take a right turn at the carina before moving in a posterior to anterior direction within the middle lobe. Pay attention now to the 3D image which demonstrates the movement of the posterior to anterior direction. We then flip the CT horizontally so that the right side of the CT image will correlate with the right side of our bronchoscopic image. As such. Therefore, the middle lobe appears as this circle now. Using my daughter's trusty teddy bear again, I would like to illustrate why flipping the coronal CT horizontally will mimic the bronchoscopic view. The original right middle lobe coronal CT image is on the left, and the teddy bear on the right is demonstrating the middle lobe airways, as indicated by the laser pointer. During bronchoscopy, however, the teddy bear will be positioned as shown. This means that we will need to orientate the coronal CT to match the teddy bear's orientation. We do so by flipping the CT horizontally, so that the right side of the CT image will correlate with the right side of our bronchoscopic image. As such. Recall that our bronchoscope will be moving in the posterior to anterior direction, as reflected by the 3D arrow. This means that our bronchoscopic view is actually from the posterior of the teddy bear. As such. And you'll see that this is our movement from posterior to anterior. The blue arrow again shows our bronchoscope moving in the posterior to anterior plane. And you can see now that this demonstrates that our orientation of the bronchoscopic view is exactly the same as our coronal CT image, which we flipped horizontally. During bronchoscopy, as mentioned, we are moving in the posterior to anterior direction within the middle lobe. Hence, it is important to scroll the CT scan such that it is moving from posterior to anterior. As such. To help with the orientation, remember as you scroll that the spine is located posteriorly and the heart is anterior. In summary, for the middle lobe, we will need to orientate the coronal CT image by flipping horizontally, then scrolling in the posterior to anterior direction. We are now ready to draw our airway map. We start by flipping the coronal CT horizontally. We then scroll through the CT from the posterior to anterior direction to find the path through the airways which leads to the mass. You may find it helpful to scroll backwards as well to identify the target airway leading from the mass. I will allow the CT to play through once first. And if you pay attention, you will see that one of the inferior holes will become completely engulfed by the mass. Now, we can rewind back and begin our drawing. We see the first branching occurs at an angle like so, and the top hole is smaller than the bottom one, and we should pay attention to draw it as such. The holes then move on to split, and if we have paid close attention, we will know that this hole on the right is our hole of interest. And indeed, you will see that it becomes completely engulfed by the mass. And there's most likely an endobronchial lesion in this location. Now we can follow our airway map into the middle lobe. As we go into the middle lobe, we can see the branching which we have drawn. And we know that we have to follow this inferior hole. And when we go inside, we can see again that there's a left and right split. And if we were to go into the right hole, we already can find an endobronchial tumor as expected, which appears with a malignant dot pattern on narrowband imaging. In such a case, we can proceed with endobronchial biopsy under direct visualization, but my preference is still to perform a radial ultrasound to delineate the extent of the tumor and to correlate it on fluoroscopy. This allows me to wedge the scope in position to minimize bleeding into the airways during biopsy. You can see that there's a concentric radial EBUS image, as expected. We proceed to mark the radial length with a sticker and correlate the length to the biopsy forceps. Remember from our earlier video that it is important to pay attention to the radial EBUS in both inspiration and expiration on fluoroscopy, and to note both the cranial and caudal extent and medial to lateral extent of the mass. We then ensure that the scope is wedged in position, and we proceed to biopsy it with a biopsy forceps. We also performed systematic mediastinal staging for this patient, and on EBUS TBNA, there was an enlarged station 7 lymph node with coagulation necrosis sign present, which we biopsied with an EBUS needle. The rapid on-site evaluation was positive for malignancy, and histology for both the station 7 lymph node and lung mass showed TTF1 positive non-small cell lung adenocarcinoma. EGFR exon 21 mutation was positive and PD-L1 expression 5%. She underwent adjuvant chemo with cisplatin pemetrexed and then curative resection with VATS middle lobectomy. She is currently on osimertinib and remains disease-free. Thank you very much for joining me on today's tutorial of airway mapping of the middle lobe. In the next video, we will be tackling two tricky segments, the LB6 and RB6. The concepts we have learned today will be applicable for those segments, so do take a moment to reflect on how you can map those airways out. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Do message me if you have any comments, queries, or suggestions for future videos. Please do like, share, and subscribe to my video tutorial series so that you won't miss out on another episode of Airway Mapping Made Easy. Thank you.